now, mates, lend an ear.
Hear us now.
Captain Franz at the helm, so steer. Gather round the partnership's deck.
Schrepf's command.
Tales from the leaders of the partnership trade. So we chant by the podcast glow. Through veritable seas to boxes flow. Dar or die. Hoist the sail.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Deep Partnership. Today I'm joined by Rich Gardner, who's the former SVP of Partnerships at Klaviyo, marketing automation platform for e-commerce providers. And at Klaviyo, Rich has built out a partnerships team of 60 people. He helped scale the partner program from several hundred partners to over 5,000 partners and established a huge strategic partnership with Shopify that we're going to talk about today. Thanks so much for joining the show, Rich.
Franz, I'm thrilled to be on board the partnership. I will be your first mate for the next 30 minutes.
Yes, exciting. So for today's show, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as well. And we're going to discuss them live with Rich. But to get us started, can you walk us a little bit through the early days of Klaviyo, when you joined, and also what the partner program looked like back in those days?
Sure. I joined Klaviyo in the spring of 2019, and just to give the other bookend, I departed last spring. So I was at Klaviyo for 5 years. And when I joined the business, I joined at the perfect time for a partnerships-minded leader. The CEO and co-founder, Andrew, had just started to think about how partnerships could become more of a strategic growth accelerator for the business. His mindset was already moving in that direction. And there was a small team already in place. It was 5 or 6 people back then, really good, smart people who were hungry to do good for the company. But what was missing was a strategy, someone who could come in and tie all of the different partner motions together into a broader strategy for the business. Thankfully, that's when I met Klaviyo, and that was arguably what I did for the last 5 years.
Awesome. And I do see we have our first comment from Lincoln, so I want to give Lincoln a shout out. Lincoln is tuning in from the UK and is a regular for the show. So thanks for
Hi,
joining
Lincoln.
us today. That's awesome. So you said Andrew had already an idea of partnerships being a growth lever for the company, but what exactly was his directive for you when you joined the team?
Yeah, so his directive to me was to figure out how Klaviyo's ecosystem, not just, I think there's a different definition between partnerships and ecosystem. Ecosystem, at its broadest, is a collection of different kinds of partnerships, right? You could think of it that way. And Andrew had started to think about this ecosystem around Klaviyo. Klaviyo, as you said, is a marketing automation platform. And around marketing automation were various types of solutions and services providers. There were marketing agencies, there were development shops, there were other apps that would complement Klaviyo in some way. And there were also these ginormous players called the e-commerce platforms. Think about Shopify and WooCommerce and BigCommerce. And so collectively, that was clearly an ecosystem around Klaviyo. And so my mission was do not think just about partnerships. No offense to anyone on this call. Don't think just about partnerships. Think about that ecosystem as a whole around Klaviyo, and how can we become more thoughtful and strategic in our approach to that ecosystem? How can we make it a growth accelerator for our customers, number one, for Klaviyo, and for our partners as well? And so that was my focus when I walked in the door. And what a huge mission that felt like, and what a great time to have that seat at Klaviyo.
Yeah, especially because the e-commerce space is so fragmented, right? You don't just have one provider. We have so many different tools which cover different niche solutions within the e-commerce tool stack. So I can imagine like that ecosystem must be quite overwhelming. And if your leadership
It,
team
it
just comes to you and says like, okay, look after the ecosystem, that's a tall number.
Well, Franz, here's the truth. I had come from outside of e-commerce
Yeah.
and outside of marketing technology. My background was more in business development and general management at tech-enabled services businesses. And so I had to learn it all. And I'm going to give a shout out to an indirect mentor of mine, Scott Brinker from HubSpot, who back when I was just trying to figure out e-commerce and martech, he used to put together this single slide which laid out the, at that time, 1,000 or 1,500 martech solutions by category. Now that single slide is like a graphic that you probably can't print on a regular printer. It's 8,000 or 10,000 solutions. That, to your point, e-commerce and martech has become such a wonderful but at sometimes noisy universe of solutions providers.
Yeah, 100%. Before we move on, I want to give a quick shout out to some people who joined us in the audience. We have Jennifer, good to see you. John from San Francisco, right around the corner. Great to see you, John. We have Ferris from Irvine. Great to see you, Ferris. And we have a question from John, which is, were there specific product or technology gaps in the ecosystem that you were looking to fill at the time? Or did you just have a directive of looking at the ecosystem as a whole?
So this is an interesting question, John. Thanks for asking it. I think that there are a couple of ways to think about technology gaps. Like gap to what, right? You have to think about the endpoint, where you're trying to go. And at different points in my time at Klaviyo, I would think about how app partners could fill our product gaps in two different ways. One is a gap to a customer expectation. So imagine an SMB's customer expectation of what a product should be able to do can be different than what a middle market or enterprise customer expects that same product to be able to do. So there can be a gap in there. And Klaviyo at times, depending on where our customer focus was, or we focused on SMB, we focused on mid-market or enterprise, at times we wanted to fill product, we wanted to extend product functionality through partners so that we could meet customer expectation. The other way to think about it, though, is in e-commerce in particular, these platforms, Shopify and WooCommerce and Salesforce Commerce Cloud and the others, each of them represent their own kind of mini ecosystem. And if you wanted to be a solution provider like Klaviyo, where you could provide your solution to merchants in the Shopify ecosystem and in the BigCommerce ecosystem and in the WooCommerce ecosystem, et cetera, you often had to think, which are the apps that we need to integrate with to be a fully baked solution in that ecosystem? So again, the gap there is not so much to customer expectation, it's what's the gap to be a credible solution in this new e-com platform ecosystem. I hope that's not too much detail.
No, that's amazing. I mean, it just seems like there are so many large players you could tackle, right? There's WooCommerce, BigCommerce, like Salesforce Commerce Cloud, Shopify, etc. And each one of these is like no small feat, right? Getting into them and like also making sure that you have your unique value proposition for the customers of these ecosystems. How did you land on Shopify? Or was there already a leadership directive of like, oh, Shopify is going to be big for us?
When I joined Klaviyo in the spring of 19, Klaviyo already had a partnership agreement with Shopify and some other of the platforms. And the Shopify partnership was very similar to other e-commerce platform partnerships. It was, in return for being posted in the App Store, in Shopify's App Store, to be a listed integration in the App Store, you would pay Shopify certain revenue share. There would be other bells and whistles, but essentially it was a pretty transactional kind of partnership, which was not uncommon, and even to this day is not uncommon with the platforms. And so that was the state of the partnership paper between the companies. And the better news though was there was clearly product market fit for Shopify solution with Klaviyo and e-commerce merchants. Like there was already this really strong market signal that Shopify and Klaviyo together as a joint solution for an e-commerce brand was really, really popular. And so that was a great opportunity when I walked in the door to see, sure, there is a partnership agreement. I think that there can be something more down the line, but this product market fit is where it all starts.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it always starts with the customer. We had Joe Rice on recently, who was the former head of developer platform at Twitter, and he also said
Sure.
like something which really stuck with me, which is like, show me your customers and I show you your partners. And like you have to start from like, where is the product market fit with the customer? Like, what other tools are they using
You-
where you can seamlessly integrate with?
Franz, so smart. I work with a number of early stage companies now um, who are interested in building out an ecosystem strategy or partnership strategy or grow faster through partners, et cetera. Not uncommon. And one of the first things that I advise those companies to do is you have to look at the ecosystem around your customer. Like, who are the various players? What do they do? What problems do they solve for that customer? What problem do you solve for that customer? And and then it goes from there. But it's if you start there, that those are the seeds of a partnership strategy.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think too often we get stuck in like what I call shiny partner syndrome, where we like look at big brands and we're like, wouldn't it be great if we partner with Google? But that's maybe not like the partner that your customer actually works with, right? Maybe there's a smaller player that actually makes a lot more sense for you and your customer.
Sure. And I'm sure everyone who's listening to the partnerships podcast knows this already, but a key question when you're looking to partner with another business is what value do you offer them? Right? There are three
Yeah,
questions to ask. One is what value do the two of you together offer a customer? Right? If there's no 1 + 1 = 3, then why are you even why are both sides bothering? But the next question I think we need to ask in the partnerships world is what value do we provide to the partner? Like, can I stand in the shoes of Google, to use your example, and see what value they get from partnering with me? If I can't articulate what that value is, then there's probably not a strong partnership there. And then, of course, the third question is, what value do they provide us? But that should be the
yeah.
last question you ask.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that. Like in the book on partnerships, there's literally a triangle which I call the partner value triangle, and it's a customer,
Mm,
partner, and you. And then the way to
mm.
solve it is like customer first, partner second, you third. Because most people like approach it from exactly the opposite way around, and that's just a surefire recipe for disaster. I do want
Yes,
to give a shout out
agreed.
to Anton, who just joined us and boarded the partnership from Toronto. Great to see you, Anton. And
Hi,
I
Anton.
have a question for you because this is something which I struggled with a lot. Like at StreamYard and Hopin, like we had a lot of agency partners with technology partners, and we also had big partners where we had alliances with like LinkedIn and YouTube and so forth. And how do you
Mm.
balance the investment in these like large long-term partnerships versus the short-term smaller partners that might drive more immediate results, right? Like an agency is something which is much easier to onboard as a partner into your program and deliver like immediate results versus a
Mhm.
Shopify with like a $100 million investment and large scale like strategic partnership, which takes years to set up.
Well, this might be an unsatisfying answer, but you have to be able to do both. And I was very fortunate at Klaviyo, so in a lot of ways. But one is my seat at Klaviyo, as the SVP of Partnerships. I was responsible both for the agency partner team, so more classically a channel kind of motion. Although I don't really like that word channel, and we can have a separate session on why that is. But that looks mostly like a channel motion or similar to a channel motion, and product partnerships. So product
Mhm.
partnerships are less, at least in my view, less about did we hit our number this week or this month or this quarter, They're more about what are we doing with these other solutions to, in the long game, drive growth for our business, their business, and for our customers. And so that's where the work with Shopify and frankly all of the other e-commerce platforms, because Klaviyo works with all of Shopify's competitors. There was nothing about the investment you mentioned or about the Shopify partnership as a whole that was exclusive. And that's important because Klaviyo wants to work with e-commerce brands wherever they are. And today, Klaviyo works with restaurants and other kinds of businesses that might not use Shopify or e-commerce. So the point is that product partnerships is where I had the ability to think a little more long term and a little more strategically. But that didn't mean that I could ignore where a lot of revenue was coming from, which was the agency business. I had a big team, and I was very fortunate in that sense. But even if I was just a one person band, I would have somehow had to split my time with the CEO's alignment between those product partnerships, long plays, and the more transactional agency business.
Yeah, definitely. And then with your team, like how did you split up that time? I assume like the large strategic alliance was probably something you spent time on, but like how did you manage that team, or like how did you split up the partnerships, the different type of partners between your 60 people team?
Yeah, well, it wasn't 60 people for all 5 years. It grew over time. It's Klaviyo
Yeah.
itself grew, of course. I mean, when I joined Klaviyo, it was 300 employees, and now I think they're over 2,000. And so the partnerships team grew in lockstep. But to answer your question, the agency business, the agency part of the partnerships organization was always the largest part of the organization, and that's because of the 5,000 partner number you mentioned at the outset. Most of those partners are agencies. Now, they might be really big ones, they might be really small ones, or freelancers even, but they're agencies. And so having a team that could manage those relationships, be thoughtful about how we were building relationships with these agency partners. How are we helping them grow their business? How are we enabling them on Klaviyo's latest functionality? How are we enabling them to help their clients grow? That was always the biggest part of my organization at Klaviyo, and that's also where a lot of the budget went, right? Because you have to travel, and you pay. We had rev share program with those kinds of partners, and so it was also a big part of where the budget lived.
Got it. And then as you decided like which partners to work with, like Shopify is like a behemoth. It's like a giant company, and they have like a very well-structured partner program of like this is what you can expect. You get listed. There's a rev share. This is the transactional relationships we have. What was your vision for what that could look like? How you could improve this partnership? How you could become more strategic?
You know, I didn't know when I walked in the door at Klaviyo. From the outside, um, there were strong indications like product market fit that the partnership was quite strong between Shopify and Klaviyo, and in that sense, it was. But pretty early on, when I joined the business, when I joined Klaviyo, I came to learn that there was some that there had been some like transactional vibe creeping into the partnership between the two companies. You mentioned Shopify has a pretty standard transactional rev share arrangement with all of their partners, and that was true of Klaviyo at the time too. Uh, and a lot of the partnership conversation between the two companies in those early days when I walked in was about revenue share. And Franz, I never really understood that. It's not that there shouldn't be important commercials between two very big partners of each other. There should be, and RevShare should be a part of it. But I saw so much overlap, Franz, in how Shopify talked about delighting their customers, growing entrepreneur businesses, and how Klaviyo talked about helping our customers grow, the very product-centric nature of both companies. It just, even in those early days when I was still learning e-commerce and frankly about both businesses, I detected this like thread of commonality around the product. And none of that product commonality translated to the partnership agreement. It was just a rev share agreement, really. I mean, an integration, but a rev share agreement. And so, Franz, that was the seed where I started to think, this doesn't feel right. And then over the course of the next couple of years, the trend, it's particularly the first year that I was at Klaviyo, Shopify changed. The details don't really matter that much, but Shopify changed their rev share agreement, and it resulted in a huge price increase, not just for Klaviyo, but for a lot of their partners. And that really brought to the surface that the whole relationship had become about revenue share and had become overly transactional. And I was determined to change that. Plus, my CEO is like, hey, we can't just have this kind of transactional partnership with our largest partner. I also believed that was true at Shopify, though, Franz. I also believe that Klaviyo had proven itself as such a market leader for their own customers that even they probably had people on their side of the table thinking, you know what, it doesn't feel right that this large partner of ours is just a rev share partner. And so that's where things stood, and that was the impetus to start to think about the art of the possible. Like, what could this partnership become, Franz? And it sounds a lot simpler in a 30-minute podcast than it did in the 2 or 3 years it took to get it done.
Yes, we're just condensing 3 years down into 2 minutes, but
yeah, but can I, for in the interest of brevity, can I point to a couple of things on the Shopify relationship?
absolutely.
I wish that my colleague on the other side of the table, on the Shopify side of the table, was here, because it really did take him and some open-mindedness on both sides to move from a very transactional relationship where even some doubt or some distrust had crept in. Back in those days, Shopify launched their own email product, which was kind of competitive with Klaviyo, or at least it seemed to be in those early days. And when you consider yourselves a really important partner and Shopify launches their own competitive product, like, wow, maybe we're not as deep a partner as we thought. And so that's an example of how distrust can start to creep into even really important partnerships. And as a partner leader, Franz, and you and I and those on this call, sometimes our job is about restoring trust with a potential partner. It's not just about the dollars and the cents. Yes, dollars and cents matter, and you'll get to those. But until you start to rebuild trust, particularly if you're trying to do something new and big and bold, I don't think you get there. And the biggest part of my challenge and my work in the Shopify relationship was helping to restore some of that trust at all levels. First, my contact at Shopify, we had to trust each other despite, really knockdown, drag out fights over rev share and price increases and all the rest of it. We had to trust each other. Our bosses had to trust each other, the CROs, and then the CEOs even, like at the C-suite. There needed to be trust, and so that was my mindset, and it took some time to chip away at that, but eventually we were able to do it.
That's incredible. Like, thanks for sharing. Like, that's a really detailed breakdown of how to turn from transactional to like more strategic. I'm just curious. Like, this is like a 3-year process. Like, you've been chipping away at that for a long time, which means like there's probably a lot of like questioning internally, like, is this worth it? Like, are we actually like on the right track and so forth? How did you get that buy-in from leadership to like actually embark on this multi-year endeavor? And how do you make sure that you stayed aligned with your executives, but then also how the partner executives stayed aligned with this initiative over like this 3-year period?
Well, let me put it bluntly. There was more than one time that I thought I would be fired over the course of this Shopify negotiation and the twists and turns that happened, because it wasn't easy, and there were times when the CEO and I weren't aligned, and so as the partnerships leader, the person who put my neck out in the early days for this change in the nature of the partnership, that felt like a lot of pressure. Now, how did I do it? Well, I mean that also that makes it sound simpler than it was, but I'll say a few things that went into ultimately helping this partnership get off the ground. One, the restoring the trust. Two, internally moving in a slow, some at times very too slow and deliberate manner to bring people along, particularly the CEO and the CFO and the CRO, probably in that order at the time, was to move very deliberately. And we have a phrase we had, I don't know, not Klaviyo anymore, but we had a phrase there, they probably still do, called, it's the importance of showing your work, right? And so what that meant for me in the Shopify context was lots of write-ups showing my thinking on, hey, like, what's the logic of this? And why am I recommending a certain course of action? Now, ultimately, that getting the partnership to the signature page was involved a lot more people at Klaviyo. Whatever the investment portion was, that's not something I had the authority to negotiate. So of course, Andrew and his co-founder Ed and our general counsel and the CFO were all heavily involved to get it to a signature point. But my mission, especially in those early days, was bring people along, bring Andrew along, show him my work. And if he felt like my thinking was compelling, he'd come along for the ride. Didn't mean that there weren't a couple of times where I thought my job was going to end at Klaviyo, but I made it. And the deal got done. So
That's what happens when you take risks, right? Like there's going to be a potential backlash as well if you take those big risks trying to win those big alliances.
yeah, I felt like there was risk either way, Franz, because and we can take it out of the Shopify and Klaviyo context, but if you think about any partnership that has become really large, which is positive, right? Like, wow, it's a huge partnership, but overly transactional, there's risk there. There's risk there because a change in your partner's corporate structure, in their leadership, a change in their strategy, and all of a sudden, this very large partner of yours goes away. What does that do to your business? And so I felt like the art of the possible, thinking a little differently about how Klaviyo could work with Shopify and how there could be product components and sales components and marketing components and all the rest of it. I felt like that was the right risk to take.
Yeah. It's risky not to take risks in a way as well, because otherwise everything just grows stale, right? And then you have partner concentration risk where one partner is really important, but you don't actually know what they're doing or what's going on behind the scenes. And then that can backfire as well. I do want to touch upon this as well, though, because you were part of a wider ecosystem. Like you were not just part of the Shopify ecosystem, but as you said, there's BigCommerce, WooCommerce, Salesforce, Commerce Cloud. There were so many different other players. And then in 2022, I saw this big announcement in TechCrunch that like Shopify invested 100 million in Klaviyo, which is just one thread of this very large strategic partnership. But what message did that send to your other partners, and how did you navigate those relationships? Now that like you have this very tight connection to one of the largest players who is actually a competitor of them.
Sure. The reality is it's not that uncommon in certainly in e-commerce and MarTech for these kinds of competitor agnostic partnerships to exist. And you can look at Klaviyo and Shopify as a good example of this. Klaviyo, even at that time, worked with most of Shopify's competitors. And we were very thoughtful and intentional about messaging that. Even at the time the partnership was announced, the new strategic partnership with Shopify was announced, we were very clear that we were going to continue working with customers who were on WooCommerce or BigCommerce and continue working with those platforms themselves. Klaviyo had very large, important relationships with both Woo and with BigCommerce at the time. And then if you look at it from the Shopify perspective, Shopify works with a number of Klaviyo competitors, and that was true at the time as well. So it's just this really interesting. Doesn't mean that it didn't make a little bit of discomfort. It's with some of our partners who wondered, well, what does this mean? But I think when people took a step back and saw that, Shopify wasn't going to sit on Klaviyo's board or, demand a certain strategy for the business, I think everybody just adjusted and saw that we continued to invest in these other platform partnerships at the time.
That makes sense. I guess like it's a signal to the market, but you also make sure that you keep doors open, right? Like I think we had a comment from Jennifer before that exclusivity isn't great because it doesn't lead to competition. And so if you're the exclusive provider for a partner, like that can actually lead like backfire because then there's no incentive for you to keep on improving your product and keep on improving your service, right? So it makes sense that you still
Yeah.
want to work with everybody who's in the ecosystem.
For sure. And I think Jennifer is getting at, I am not a big believer in exclusive arrangements. Generally speaking, there is just lots of risk in signing up with just one partner. Don't limit yourself.
Yeah, don't limit yourself. I like that. We're coming up on time. I do have one last question for you, Rich, but I also have a surprise
Sure.
for the audience. This is unscripted.
Oh,
We didn't talk
okay.
about this before, Rich, but since we have such great response from the audience today, I want to do a draw, which means that everybody who commented today in this chat is going to be eligible to be drawn for one hardcover copy of the book on partnerships that I'll
Oh.
send to you. We have 6 entries right now. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to still comment. If you don't know what to comment, I highly suggest #showthework. Because that was one of my favorite takeaways from today, is that as a partnership leader, you got to show your work and make sure that like other people actually understand what you're doing, especially if you're working on these long-term initiatives. But for you, Rich, like one last question I have is like, if somebody is working on these like really large deals right now and struggling to win, like struggling to dance with an elephant, what advice would you have for them?
Oof. Call me. We can have more war stories. Look, I think that some of it is timing. So dancing with an elephant when you're the size of one of the flies that is on the back of the elephant biting at it, that might not be the best time. You might not get their attention. I think it's a much better time, more promising time when you've proven that you have some value. And the best way to prove that to a potential partner is through customers. Show that partner or potential partner that you have a lot of their customers or that you're on the road to getting a lot of their customers. Make it so that they can't ignore you. Because elephants, they like to ignore the small flies. Make it so that they just can't ignore you.
Yeah. And the way to do it is not to be annoying, I guess, but to actually be so good that they can't ignore you. Like work with so many of the customers that they can't ignore you.
You got it. Product market fit. It's kind of where we started this conversation from.
Yeah.
It really came down to product market fit.
Yeah, I love it when the conversation goes full circle. But with that being said, we have 10 entries now. We have Cesar, Vincent, Gabriela, and Galina join us as well. So shout out to you all. Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And with that being said, let's draw. Exciting drum roll.
You can't win it, Franz.
I can't win it. No. That seems like I already have enough. Like you can see behind me, there are quite a few. We'll draw again. And Cesar, congrats on winning one of the books of partnerships. I'm going to reach out to you via DM. And then for everybody who joined us today, I really appreciate you taking the time. You could have been anywhere and you decided to spend this time with us. And that really means a lot to me. And thanks so much for joining us, Rich. Like that was a really enlightening talk about the strategic partnership between Shopify and Klaviyo, but also just partnerships in general.
Thank you very much for having me, Franz. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. And for everybody who's joining us live, we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of the partnership. So keep an eye out for that on LinkedIn, and I'll see you there. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, folks.
Hark now, mates, lend an ear.
Hear us now.
Captain Franz at the helm so steer. Gather round the partnership's deck.
Schrepf's command.
Tales from the leaders of the partnership train. So we chant by the podcast glow. Through veritable seas to boxes flow. Dar, oh, dive. Hoist the sail.